Okay. Okay. I think, can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much, Ken. I'm actually super excited to be here. I'm really delighted to be presenting the Ravenholt lecture. And the topic that I've been asked to speak on is breaking the cycle and fundamentally changing how we approach holistic vineyard management. So I might need to keep my glasses on because I've got a very small screen that I'm going to kind of just have as a prompt. So we might even get a chance to talk about flying mice as well. There's a whole range of really cool topics that I'd like to talk about. And there's lots of information, references that you can look at if you'd like to do a deeper dive. So to begin with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and recognise their wealth of ecological knowledge and the importance of caring for country. To pay our respects for our elders, past and present, and extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Indigenous peoples. And I'm joining you today from the Kaurna country in the Adelaide Hills of South Australia. I'd very much like to acknowledge and thank all of the convening crew of the WAVE seminar. And how cool is Albert? What an amazing legacy and gift that he has provided. And it's that foresight that's magicked me here today. So, yeah, it's great to be able to come and learn from you. And I'm really keen to share lots of my Aussie insights as well. As Kent mentioned, I'm a third generation viticulturalist. I grew up on a fruit block, which is a small block where we grew wine grapes, table grapes, drying grapes, fruit for the fresh fruit market. I've worked professionally for the last 30 years and I've got undergraduate qualifications right through to a PhD in viticulture and plant protection. But the unique difference, I guess, with my training is that I actually started off to be a park ranger. So my initial training was in ecology. So I bring that lens along with a lot of knowledge and experience. And essentially, I bring a different perspective. So, yeah, there's some different angles that I can provide. For the last 6 years, I've founded and I've been running a program called Eco Vineyards. So I'd love for you to jump on that website and explore some of the resources that we have available. So I like to kind of challenge current thinking wherever I can, if it's not giving us the solutions that we're looking for. And as I mentioned, I bring a new perspective. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a right or wrong perspective, but it gives you a different angle or perhaps a viewpoint to be able to look at things from. So I've been asked to talk about ways that we can break the cycle and fundamentally change how we approach holistic vineyard management. And because I like to break the rules, I'm actually going to give you some take-home messages right up front. So one of those messages is around culture, to have an open mind and to cultivate a polyculture of thought rather than a monoculture of thought, to kind of draw an analogy from ecology. And I like to be generous with knowledge. We work from a position of generosity and kindness, and we find that that then is then received. There's reciprocity there, and we're also then greeted with lots of knowledge, so we all get to benefit in real time. Please, please, please cover your soil. We are really keen to encourage growers to have functional ground covers and active root growth 100% of the time wherever possible. Nature will always fill a void. We'd like to fill it with something that's functional and that is of our choosing. The other really key element to how we can break the cycle of a whole lot of chemical application, we can develop resistance to pests and diseases, is to have nutrient integrity. There's some fascinating work available from John Kempf through Advancing Eco-Agriculture, his Advanced Health Pyramid. I'm going to touch on that very quickly at the end of my presentation. He's one of the most brilliant thinkers in the field of regenerative agriculture at the moment. So, yeah, there's some amazing information available that we can all benefit from. I'd like to encourage us all to rip off the Band-Aids, which is breaking that cycle of intervention and embed longer term solutions. So I always like to think, what's the issue we're dealing with? How can we go back to the core principle so that we can actually address it right from the very beginning, rather than just going through and doing more of the same and having to spray chemicals or intervene with time and energy and so forth. And a gentle reminder that we are nature, and what we do to nature, we do to ourselves. So please, let's nourish individuals. In doing so, we can nourish production systems, and we can also nourish communities. So if you're ready, we're going to dig in, and I'm going to probably talk quite quickly, but there's lots of information on those slides that you can then unpack if you'd like to do a deeper dive. So yes, there are a range of current challenges, but I always think that we should think about opportunities rather than challenges. It's estimated that 98% of sprayed insecticides and 95% of herbicides miss their intended target species. How often do we see a mealybug or a caterpillar and we go out and nuke the whole patch? We really need to reconsider how much time and effort that we put into certain activities that also have some unintended consequences. In 2019, I went to the OIV conference that was occurring, and Hans Schultz made the comment, we all know that we use too many pesticides. So what can we do about it? And what are the perceptions internationally about the wine community generally? Well, this is a pretty stark image. This was on the front page of a German newspaper. And, this is the general public are getting this perception. And it was really relating to the number of chemical applications that were occurring in France, an average of 20 at that time. They had an initiative to try and reduce pesticide use by 50%. It was called Eco-Phyto, and it failed miserably. In 5 years, I think pesticide use went up by 12%. So they launched Eco-Phyto 2 about 5 years ago, and I think they're on Eco-Phyto 2030 at the moment. But, I'm here to tell you that we actually do have solutions to many of these problems. We just need to revisit a whole lot of information that perhaps has been forgotten. Another comment that Hans made was around the fact that the food system is the primary cause of biodiversity loss. And this is because we love creating monocultures. And what I'd like to do is talk to you about ways that we can incorporate a lot of biodiversity and resilience within our production systems. The UN's also had a focus over the last decade around ecosystem restoration. We've actually only got about 5 more years to meet that target in 2030, and we can't do it alone. So there's actually some really good information that's coming out through other organisations, the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation, the Oporto Protocol, Biodiversity Friend in Italy. So we all need to collaborate and share, not work in silos. So please seek out information that they're sharing as well. And we also know that ecosystem services have the capacity to help mitigate some of our issues around greenhouse gas emissions. And natural climate solutions is just a fancy way for saying we need to cover our earth and plant a lot more trees. So it's around that ecological restoration. So setting the scene, how did I get to you today? Well, in 2003, I was managing Mount Adam Vineyards. And the first thing I did there, for me, it was really intuitive to start planting supplementary vegetation, so insectary plants. So we put in about 8,000 native insectary plants over the 3 years that I was there. You can see here that I was looking at some native grasses. And my actual journey started 10 years before that, but I've omitted that and a few dodgy hairdos along the way as well. But what happened was when that vineyard changed hands, they actually sprayed out all the plants that I'd planted. So you can imagine, how grumpy I was. I was so grumpy. I inherently knew the value, but I needed to be able to demonstrate that value. So I went off and did a PhD, and here we are 22 years later. I'm spreading this amazing message all over the world. So sometimes from very small, humble beginnings, great things can occur. So we've been working with more than 160 different partnering organisations. Here's a small snapshot of them here. And we all have a focus, a common purpose around environmental stewardship. Where do I come from? I come from a place called Adelaide, which is in South Australia, where the arrow is. And the Eco Vineyards program that I run nationally across Australia runs over in WA, in Margaret River. So you can see over to the left of your screen. If you head over to the right, we have the Hunter Valley, Orange region in New South Wales. We then drop down to the Yarra Valley, Mornington Peninsula in Victoria. And then in South Australia, we run in a whole range of different regions from the Riverland, Clare Valley, Adelaide Hills, Langhorne Creek, McLaren Vale. I think I might have forgotten one. So yeah, there's really good coverage in terms of that grower interaction. And we're now influencing the practices of more than 6,000 wine grape growers who will collectively manage about 143,000 hectares of wine grapes. It's gone down since that estimate. So all the information that I talked to you about today is applicable to a whole range of different crops and regions. And what I'd encourage you to do is consider how some of these concepts apply to Washington State. Just to give you an idea of the area of Australia, we've kind of superimposed it across the USA. We haven't got Alaska in that map, but you can see that it's a pretty wide area. It's about 2 million square hectares less, square kilometres less than the USA. And it takes about 30 hours to kind of fly between those two countries. So yeah, it's been great to come across and to spend some quality time here. So everything that I talk about relating to eco vineyards, of course, the core is around ecology. Everything's interconnected, and we're really focused on the functionality and building resilience into the production systems. However a grower wishes to grow, we're not precious. We're an open house, whether you're conventional, minimal input, organic, biodynamic, regenerative, or other. What we do is we suggest ecological practices that can be incorporated to create incremental step change and empower wine growers with the knowledge and confidence to incorporate these practices. So we find this is the quickest way to accelerate meaningful practice change. The Eco Vineyards program has been running over the last 3 years from a national perspective, and we've focused on soil health, ground covers, including cover crops, and also functional biodiversity. And since 2001, we've been able to, 2021, we've been able to show a discernible improvement in practices. So the targets that I was given was to make sure that we had the land area dedicated to enhancing functional biodiversity had increased by 10%, and currently that's sitting at 25%. And the use of cover crops increased by 10%, which is currently 35%. We don't have metrics at the moment for soil health. So within those 3 years, we've looked at a whole range of really fascinating topics, everything from showing growers how to do composting and compost tea, changing our soils from bacterially dominated, where we have a lot of weedy species, to more fungally dominated, which is really important for perennial crops like grapevines. How to go through and make sure that we have good water infiltration and reducing compaction in soils, and how we can read what our weeds are telling us and use them as indicator species. Maybe we can embrace weeds. If they're not noxious and not invasive, they're actually performing a fantastic service to tell us what's lacking or what the challenge is within our soils, and they're actually healing the soil for us. Remember, nature will always fill a void, and it's a better option for us to fill it with something that we want. Otherwise, the weedy species are there doing the job for us for free. With ground covers, we talk about ground covers rather than cover cropping. Cover cropping quite often refers to introduced species on an annual basis. We'd like to move that conversation from annuals to perennials, from introduced to native, and from a monoculture of a single species to multi-species mixes. So, yeah, we've got a lot of information available around traditional cover cropping, but also the use of native grasses and forbs, and the forbs is the flowering plants. And functional biodiversity is all of the fauna found in association, both below ground and above ground. So predatory arthropods, which is a fancy name for insects, spiders and mites, microbats, which are the flying mice, and also insectivorous and raptor birds of prey. So what is agroecology? Doesn't mean that I'm grumpy all the time. Agro, really, the root word is agros in Greek, which refers to agricultural, a field, a plot of land or countryside. And ecology is from the root word from German, ecology, which is the interrelationship of organisms and their environments. So it's a balance between a relationship between agricultural production and also ecological processes. I get to do the best of both worlds. And it's an approach which really prioritises growing in harmony with nature. So biodiversity is the variety of plants and animal life, and each species has a niche in this ecosystem and contributes towards its functionality. So we don't mind seeing scruffy vineyards as long as they're functional. You can see here, this is one of the Henschke's vineyards at Lenswood in the Adelaide Hills. This is a site that I use for my PhD research. We've got a pretty typical, just grassy mid-row, which is volunteer weeds. It's not a traditional cover crop. We've got some remnant plants next to the vineyard. But what we've got is a tremendous opportunity to be able to boost the biodiversity, whether that's planting plants adjacent to the strainer posts, under vine, or in the areas that you can already see. And we have a diversity of fauna found in association, like the insects that we can attract. They can then attract higher order predators like insectivorous birds. We have a diamond firetail and fantail here. We have the flying mice, which are the microbats. They can eat up to half their body weight in insects every night, and they're voracious eaters of moths. We also have a range of different raptor birds. So this is a bobel cow. It's got a mouse in its mouth, but it's also probably going to knock off a few of those microbats as well if we don't look. And a lot of the raptors are really important. This is a goshawk, and they're quite territorial. So they'll actively patrol the perimeter of a vineyard and keep fruit-eating birds out. So, yeah, everything has its place, and there's a balance there. We're really wanting to make sure that the system has a lot of resilience so that if there's disturbance, that it will reorganise very quickly, whether that is an extreme weather event, might be a biosecurity incursion. What we're wanting to do is have long-term solutions. I'm hoping that you don't have any vineyards that look like this. Please tell me you don't. We do, unfortunately. The problem with a vineyard like this in the middle of winter that doesn't have a blade of grass growing is that it's devoid of life. It's less diverse, it's less stable, and it's less resilient. And my goodness, that soil is like concrete. It's so compacted, which means that any water is going to evaporate or it's going to flow off. It's not going to actually go in. You don't have any of the microorganisms making nutrients plant available, and the whole system shuts down. So we want to see less bare ground. Managing a vineyard means managing an ecosystem where grapevines are the dominant species, but it doesn't need to be a monoculture. So we need less sterile, less compacted and less dead ecosystems. We call this the dead zone or scorched earth, and I'm on a real quest to make sure that we can reclaim these areas and return them to fully functional under-vine areas. Just as an aside, we've got mallow, I think you might call it cheeseweed on the side. That's an indicator of low organic matter, waterlogged, compacted soil with poor drainage. And it's there with a taproot helping to open up the soil to try and remediate the soil. So it's doing good work, even though we call it a weed. Those weedy species potentially are really valuable within the system if they're not invasive or causing major issues. So an ecosystem is a biological community of interacting organisms in the physical environment, and it's a complex network, which means that it's likely to be better buffered and resilient, much less likely to have pest, weeds and insects dominate. Predators. So there's a range of predators. I've mentioned the microbats. They are micro, size of a small mouse or smaller, and they're really active at night. They live in tree hollows, but we can also put supplementary habitat up. You can see the microbat box that we're put together with Seaford Rotary on the top right. And they use echolocation to be able to orientate themselves around and to be able to find their prey. So they can contribute significantly to the biocontrol of insect pests in and around vineyards. And we have lots of fact sheets available. So there's a fact sheet on the microbats there as well. Insectivorous birds, again, are a really important component of being able to provide biocontrol in vineyards. And this is an example with some of our raptor birds. One of our eco-growers, Dan Falkenberg, actually established a greenfield site about 20 years ago with a vineyard. He also established his local plant community, Peppermint Box Open Woodland. And that habitat around the vineyard has attracted goshawks, and they're now breeding on site, along with a whole lot of turtles, lizards, everything that you can imagine. That site's full of life, and he doesn't really need to spray for any insect pests at all. So again, we have a bird guide if you'd like to dig deeper into some of the bird species. We also put up raptor perches. This is our resident bird nerd, Phil, and we are creating a highlight within a vineyard, which is a very low, constant level where there isn't really any perches. So by being able to put those predator perches up, we're putting a vantage point up and encouraging those raptors to come in, and they are coming into vineyards. And you can also use nesting boxes for owls, which I think you do locally as well. And the predators, this is what I've spent much of my career looking at. You can see that there's a huge diversity of different insects and spiders, more than 100 different morphospecies. Morphospecies refers to visually distinct species. And, they are then also contributing to biocontrol of insect pests like mealybug and all sorts of other things that you might have here as a local challenge. So, yeah, the good news is that we've got lots of little insect workers in production systems that can provide natural biological control virtually for free if we understand how to attract and look after them. The challenge is that when we kill off the natural enemies of the pest, we inherit their work, and we're left with a system that's completely devoid of any life. So how do we attract these different predators in and around vineyards? One of the ways that we can do that is plant insectary plants, provide a source of food, and also go through a whole range of other benefits that they provide in terms of ecosystem services. So we refer to an acronym called SHELTER, which refers to, called SNAP, which refers to S for shelter, N for nectar, A for alternative prey, and P for pollen. So the food is the nectar and the pollen. When we have grasses, they'll produce pollen, but they won't produce nectar. That's why it's really important for us to have lots of flowering plants. Nectar is really important to provide energy. You can imagine a hoverfly, doing this all day. It needs a lot of carbohydrates and energy. We need the pollen because that's the source of protein, and insects need that to be able to produce lots of healthy eggs. We need a source of shelter. If there's disturbance, the predators can leave and then come back. And if there isn't anything flowering, they need an alternative source of prey. So insectary plants support populations of all of these predatory arthropods. You may be familiar with some of these other introduced insectary plants, which are known for their superior provisioning services, like buckwheat, which comes from China. But I think you've got a native example of buckwheat here. And I also must say that I've seen some work from David James, who has left this community with such a gift of information around your local native plant species. Please implement it urgently. It's been around for nearly 15 years. It is part of the solution. Also Phacelia, which is from America, and Alyssum, which is from Europe and Asia. The challenge we have is that these species aren't well adapted to all regions. And we run the risk of actually creating another monoculture within a monoculture of grapevines. So we want to have diversity. So some of these species might work really well, but we need a diversity, and we need to make sure that the species are locally adapted and appropriate for your region. So there's a range of desirable plant attributes that we look for in insectary. So we look for snap. We also want an early and a long or overlapping flowering period, and seasonal synchronicity and overwintering. We want the plants to have the capacity to outcompete weedy species, but have low potential to be a weed. Low establishment costs, available commercially, ease of cultivation to source, and also to be able to collect and strike seed. And that they need to be naturally adapted to the site, preferably native, and have low ongoing maintenance. And with perennial woody plants or self-regenerating grasses, you can actually trim them up, and you can encourage a lot more flowering on the outside of bushes. And you can also structure when the plants flower as well to coincide with key peak times of, kind of potential insect damage. And we want to make sure that they won't be a pest species. So a lot of the species that I'll show you are of Australian origin, but you can see the types of plants that we see a lot of value in. So we want plants with lots of really small white flowers, or a diversity of different flowering sizes and shapes, but not necessarily big, large size, kind of flowers. They're usually accessed by insects such as bees and butterflies that have longer mouth parts. These are three of the species that I looked at as a part of my PhD. We have sweet Bosseria, which is Bosseria spinosa, prickly tea tree, which is Leptospermum continentale. Both of these, I think, have been introduced to California, but they're seen as weedy species because they're not appropriate and local to the local area. And wallaby grasses, Retidosperma, I think you can find in South America, but not here. The benefit of the two plants on the left is that they have lots of really small white flowers, and they're evergreen. That's the other benefit of many of the Australian species. They're either evergreen or perennials. And the wallaby grasses are great in terms of their capacity to provide a source of pollen, but they have lots of other attributes as well. So we're looking for native plants. They tend to have a lower occurrence of pests and a higher occurrence of natural enemies. More than 90% of Australia's flora and fauna is endemic. And what we find is many of the predatory arthropods, the good bugs, are also endemic, and they've co-evolved with these plants. So we find them in association, and that gives us a lot of confidence to know that these plants are going to work really well for us. We've done the work. We've looked at the good bugs found in association. We don't really need to do that work anymore. There's such a body of literature that consistently shows that it's of value where you have a diversity of plants, that ship has sailed. We know that it works really well. To look at the insects, these are some of the sampling methods that I use. So this is a Retallic modified beat net. What you do is you grab a rubber mallet, hit the cord on, the insects drop down into the funnel, and we put them into a little container. So it's a non-destructive way of looking at insects. We're not using a resting jar, which is like a permanent resting jar. This way we can look at what's there, and we can then release them. If we're going to look at shrubs, this is an example of a sweep net which has been modified. I've brought one of these along when we're in the field. I'm really happy to demonstrate, how we use that and look for some of those predatory arthropods. And down at the grass level, I looked at pitfall traps, and you can also use a vacuum sampler as well. The wallaby grass is an example of a C3 plant, which means that it grows during winter and early spring. It'll hay off just before summer around grapevine flowering, so it doesn't pose any risk in terms of competing with grapevines. And the other real benefit is by having a perennial plant is that you only plant it once, and it might then persist for a decade or more. You have roots that are actively growing all the time. And through research in USA, Christine Nichols found that where you've got these grapevine roots, and also you've got the case here of the wallaby grass roots, they form a symbiotic relationship with mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi produce a substrate called glomelin, which can hold nearly 4 times as much soil organic carbon as humic acid can. So if you're wanting to be able to increase organic matter, be able to hold more water, then the key to that is life in the vineyards, life having permanent species that have living roots, and you have fungal populations, but specifically mycorrhizal fungi relationships. The way that we work with growers is via something called participatory action learning. And what we do is we start really simply. We give the growers confidence and access to processes to start benchmarking where they might be that might be soil health. And they quickly catch on and then start scaling up once they can see the benefits of doing so. So we've got 76 demonstration sites around Australia. This is one of the insectaries that we planted at Bondale Wines in a real wet soak. So we've been able to create functionality into an area that would have just been a soggy area. And that works really well to share their local story with their consumers. They've got a sign there, and it's a real feature in the middle of the vineyard. What do knickers have to do with anything, you may ask? Bond's cottontails work really well to be able to look at microbial activity in the soil. So that just gives you an example of, one of the practical ways that we can engage with growers. This is Lulu Lunn. She's been growing grapes for 35 years, and you can see she's holding the elastane, which is the bits that are left that the microbes didn't consume. They'll only consume cotton or calico. But this is a way that we can really engage growers. Lulu's been growing grapes for 35 years and it got a bit tired, but by being able to bring and enthuse growers with new information around understanding ecology, she's just saying she's getting so much more enjoyment about it, every day in the vineyard now. She's observing and seeing things from a totally different perspective. This is Sarah, who's at Bleasdale. She's been planting insectary all around the vineyard. And some of the reasons why the process has worked really well is we're bridging the knowledge, confidence, and also culture gap in a non-threatening way. We're creating an understanding of agroecology. For some growers, it's the very first time that they've been introduced to some of these concepts. We're demonstrating practical insights, so we're showing, we're not telling, and we're trying to build in this longer-term thinking to create long-term solutions. We're also highlighting the complementarity of connections between nature and farming. And we're finding that there's natural born leaders in every region, and they're happy to lead the way and to inspire others and go first. So if you'd like to find out more, we've got about, 65 grower profiles written up, and we've got about 45 case studies on the Eco Vineyards website. So where do we start? We work with a plant community list. My background's also in botany, so I then take that list. I look at whether we've got ground covers, shrubs, or upper story, when those plants flower, how big they grow, so I can provide some insights for growers about where that might be appropriate to incorporate them. And we also put information together about where you can access tube stock and seed. We have some templates to do a BAP, which is a biodiversity action plan, and that helps growers to walk their way through that process, to know where to start, what the threats are, the opportunities, who's going to do what when, and how they're going to achieve their end goal. Some of the eco-grower insights include working with goats to get rid of woody weeds. This is at Yarra Yering in the Yarra Valley in Victoria. They had an overgrown kind of drain area. We fenced it off. We put some goats in there. They cleaned up the woody weeds, and we'll now plant insectary plants there. And we can also have sheep in the vineyard, not having to worry about them eating the insectary plants. Mostly, sheep will leave the plants alone anyway, but we've got the fence in, so that seems to work well. I think you're going to be talking about biocontrol of mealybug in a minute. We looked at like brown apple moth, and this is an American process called SPLAT, which is specialised pheromone and lure application technology. or as the French say, it's sexual confusion. And what we're doing here is we're using pheromones to disrupt the mating of light brown apple moth, which is our #1 insect pest, but you can also do that with mealybug as well. And it's just a matter of putting a bit of paste on the top of intermediate posts, and you can also spray out the splat too if you wish. This is Janet, who has started off as an eco grower. She's now one of our rocks, or a regional on-ground coordinator. She runs a biodynamic vineyard called Naringa, and she's got a sign there which explains to her customers that she's working with wallaby grasses. She used a biodynamically based protocol to go through and prep the soil, and you can see she's left sections there so we don't have erosion down the hill. And she's planted a whole lot of grasses and forbs, so about an 18 species mix. And this is the vacuum that we can use to suck up the bugs, just to see what's lurking there as well. So she's planted a whole lot of prickly tea tree adjacent to the strainer posts. We encourage polyculture, so other species where possible. And her husband was listening, and unbeknown to her, where they were having vine misses, he had actually planted a shrub called sweet Bacteria to replace those grapevines. So they're doing a bit of agroforestry in their vineyard now too. We do need specialised machinery and really thorough prep to be able to plant a lot of the native grasses and forbs. And we have that really good access to good quality seed and technology. So we're getting really good success rates. And there's a list of the 18 species that we're working with. This is how they look as they're starting to establish. You can see they're low growing. All the species that we select that are ground covers are less than a foot, so less than the drip line height. And it means that we don't have to slash or go in and intervene later on. They don't pose a risk in terms of frost. You can see that the grasses here have lovely fluffy seed heads, and this is what they look like when they start to hay off and they've dropped their seed. We're also creating stacked enterprises. You can see the sheer volume of seed that we have here is something like 10 to 15 times the rate that's originally seeded. So if we're seeding at, say, 10 to 15 kilograms a hectare, we can potentially harvest 100 to 150 kilograms per hectare of seed. And at $200 a kilogram, that's 20 to 30 grand a hectare, which is way more than they're getting for their wine grapes. And this can happen concurrently, fully utilising the mid-row in addition to what they're able to get or derive from wine grape production. So again, it's just a smart use of land that's being currently underutilised. And in doing so, it's pretty much set and forget. It'll be like that for decades. Don't have to lift a finger, no slashing and ongoing maintenance, just harvesting the seed. So it makes sense. At Skilligalee in the Clare Valley, they did 3 cultivations and then put the seed in a very dry season, and they got a fantastic result. So we're able to replicate this now at scale. We're doing it in the Undivine area as well. This is work that was done at in the Barossa, and Adelaide Uni spent quite a few years looking at the benefits and found that the Undivine area was sequestering up to 23% more than herbicide, and you're getting more than a doubling in microbial activity plus a whole range of other benefits as well. And this is what it looks like in the Undivine area. It doesn't pay off, it remains green, but it's not competing with the vines at all. There was some concern from growers about competition. In this case, with wallaby grasses, any drawdown in yield, and they did find some in this particular research project, was about 18% in year 1, but that was probably more so due to weed growth rather than the actual establishment of the native wallaby grass. By year 2, that had turned around to being positive, and by year 3, there was only a positive benefit, and it would have evened out any losses in year 1. So with perennials, it's important to look not just at year 1, but from year 2 to year 5. And there's lots of ecosystem service benefits in terms of storing water at depth. And this is a dry-grown vineyard. Even though there's polypipe there, they derived the water from the dam, and the dam was dry for 3 years. This is one of our eco growers that was trying to wean himself off of herbicides. You can see here the area is sterile. We have cryptogams, moss and lichen, and it looks green like that. It is as dead as a doorknob. So we asked him to stop spraying herbicide, and within a year, the native grasses had shed seed, and you had natural recruitment there. So that works really well. Some growers are cover cropping and with annual species, and they're planting right up to the bud of the vine. You can see that it looks pretty spectacular. And from a practical perspective, they're just going through, if they're concerned, and slashing at the beginning of spring. We are looking at using everlastings, and this is a species from Western Australia. We've brought it into South Australia, and again, we've replicated that in the Clare Valley. So not only does it look spectacular, it creates a real focal point near the cellar door. It's a great way for us to be able to showcase our unique Australian flora to an international marketplace. And we've got the opportunity to have cut flowers as, again, a stacked enterprise and another source of income. In the Riverland, which is a warm inland area, we're, again, looking to what grows locally. This is creeping bluebella. It's doing great at covering what would otherwise be bare ground. We initially started off with tube stock. We can assess how well the plants perform, and then we can go to seed production. In this case, Ben Castine in the Clare Valley has put in a little seed production area. He's got 14 species of native grasses and 15 species of forbs or flowering plants. Within 12 months, he's got them on weed mat there so he can harvest the seed easily. That's grown into a thriving little production area. And as soon as you have flowers on this Vitidinia, which is New Holland daisy, you can see that the ladybird beetles come in. There was lots of sexy business going on, so there was lots of different life stages and larvae amongst the adults. So that was happening really quickly. As soon as you have the flowers, you've got food, you'll attract the predatory arthropods. So yeah, and you can just see the sheer volume of seed that he was being able to grow there. This is a world first. Talk about doing things differently. This was a greenfield site planted to Riesling. This is at Penner Lane Wines in the Clare Valley, established with 18 species of different grasses and forbs. They have chosen to use a conventional herbicide in the undervine area. Once those grapevines get up to the cordon, I'm encouraging them to stop herbiciding, let that native seed shed, and they will have 100% cover. They won't have to keep chasing their tail by putting herbicide out. And we're also creating bio-hedges, for biodiversity, but also biosecurity. And what we do is we pick prickly species, prickly tea tree and Buceria spinosa. The spinosa is spiny. And we're hoping that once that establishes that we'll try and have a passive barrier to stop anyone jumping that little hedge. So where we've got people parking in the car park, they won't go into the vineyard. That's part of our protocol in terms of limiting the spread of phylloxera. We don't have it in South Australia. We haven't found it yet, but we have to assume that we've potentially got it, along with footbaths as well. We have some growers that are, again, looking at the stacked enterprise, producing wine, but also gin and vermouth. In Langhorne Creek, we have the Wilson sisters who are using native lemongrass and river mint to produce gin. I'm not a fan of roses. They provide no intrinsic value in a vineyard. They make our vineyards look very French. I'm encouraging our vineyard owners to remove rose bushes and replace them with Australian native shrubs adjacent to the strainer post. And Prue Henschke from Henschke Vineyards, who produces one of our premier wines, Hill of Grace, has really pioneered this approach. So yeah, it is not only functional, those plants look spectacular, but it means that our vineyards, in terms of marketing collateral, look uniquely Australian. So out of the 36 species that David James has identified, I'd love to know what your spectacular local species are and how you can start to champion that here as well. So if you don't know where to start, go and talk to your local nursery, get a local plant community list, get a couple of tube stock of each species, put them in the ground and observe how they grow. Make sure you put a name on them, because if it dies, you won't know what was there, never existed. And then you can scale up from there and you can start to think about sourcing seed and using seed instead. So with seed, You do need to have specialised equipment in the undervine area, in the midrow area. Similarly, it's really hard to get seeding equipment for the undervine area, so we use hydroseeding. So this is an example with an introduced species called subterranean clover, and what we're doing is using a wood mulch fibre, mixing it with water and seed. You can put mycorrhizal fungi and humic acid and other goodies in there as well. And we're spraying the seed into the area that we want it. And that dye dissipates within about 24 hours for anyone that's concerned. We, this time last year, did a whole lot of demonstration sites where we had individual species. We just scattered the seed in individual panels. We had 20 different species, and we went over the top with the hydroseeder. And I had a guy ring me 2 or 3 weeks before we were going to hit the road, and he just said, "Oh, I make hydroseeding equipment." Actually, I ignored his first phone call. By the time he got to me, he said, we manufacture hydroseeding equipment for the mining companies. Can I make something for you?" Within 3 weeks, he'd made a tailor-made machine called a hydroviner. So talk about, ag tech and having to have, many years and millions of dollars to find solutions. This guy came up with a solution within 3 weeks. And it can be used to put a whole lot of other goodies out if you've got a dry-grown vineyard, chunky bits like fish hydrolysate, a whole lot of stuff that you might use to nourish the soil. So again, we're in the process of writing that up. There's a series of case studies. And last but not least, it would be remiss of me not to tell you, not to share with you some information that I think is vitally important for the future of the wine industry. Yes, we can use chemicals. We can chemigate. That's a term I hadn't heard before. We can look at what the impact is of some of these chemicals, which I know a lot of growers are very interested in. But be careful, because even spirotetramat, which is used for mealybug control, if you're putting it through the fertigation unit, will knock out all of your predatory arthropods that are sapsuckers from the order of Hemiptera. It will also have a detrimental effect on ladybird beetles and also green lacewings, and potentially a detrimental effect as it's a systemic in vines as well. This is an example of a Band-Aid solution. What I'd like to do is get to the heart of what's really going on with a mealybug and many of our insect pests. So again, we've written that up as a case study. Feel free to download it and have a bit of a deep dive. This is information that's been around 40 plus years, actually 50 years. So many of you will be familiar with mealybug, and also we have an issue with grapevine scale, which they will feed on plants. They may also transmit virus, but they also excrete a whole lot of honeydew, which provides a substrate for the growth of sooty mould, which is a carcinogen. And so there's obviously, kind of thresholds in terms of rejection with fruit. The ants love to farm these species as well because they love eating the honeydew. That gives us an insight to the solution. And if we look at the morphology, I'll just talk about biocontrol first. Part of the solution might be biocontrol, where we have species like Cryptolemus, which is the mealybug destroyer. You can see that the ladybird beetle is in the top middle, and its larva is actually straight below it, which is a great mimic of mealybug. So it's really important to know what to look out for in the field. Green lacewings also contribute to the biocontrol. So green lacewings and ladybird beetles will be adversely affected by some of the chemical control that you might have for mealybugs, so it can be quite counterproductive. And spiders are, of course, really important as well. But if we really want to get to the nub of solving this problem, we need to look at the morphology of some of these insects. So this is an example of a grasshopper. Many insects have a digestive tube inside the tube, which is the body of the insect. If we look at species from the order Hemiptera, these are insects that have piercing and sucking mouth parts, and many of them excrete honeydew. This is an example of an aphid, and you can see here that it's got foregut, midgut and a hindgut, and it will feed on really simple sugars, really simple nitrates, but it doesn't have the capacity to be able to manage complex proteins or carbohydrates. So they actually get flushed straight out the back end as honeydew. And they have a filter chamber so they can actually pull out what they need, but they physically can't feed on a plant with really high Brix. So you'll be familiar with going through and using a refractometer to look at the ripening grapes. You can actually get the juice from the leaves as leaf sap and look at the Brix, which is a really nice proxy to look at the objective health of the plant that you're growing and your capacity as a chlorophyll manager as well. What we find, this is work from Olivier Hussein. He looks at redox, and that's very complex, but here's a simple summary of that work. He's able to identify that mealybug and scale are often correlated with low magnesium, sulfur we tend to put on anyway, but molybdenum, boron, low sugars, so low Brix, which is total soluble solids, and low manganese. And you can see there, high nitrate. So if we're putting on very simple forms of nitrogen, that's like, lollies to insects. We're actually attracting the insects. And we do that with ammonium as well. There's been some great work done by Francis Chaboseau many years ago in the late 80s in INRA. And he talks about the relationship between plants and parasites being primarily nutritional. And closer to home, William Albrecht's done a lot of work in soils, but he talks about insects are nature's garbage collectors and diseases are her cleanup crew. So, that's a pretty blunt statement, but if you have an unhealthy plant, it's unfit for human consumption. That's where the insects come and take it out. So we can use a refractometer, a pair of vice grips. I've got some examples I can show you in the field over the next couple of days. We won't be able to look at grapevines, but we can look at associated foliage. And we can look to see what those Brix levels are within the plant. And that gives us an idea of how healthy that plant is. This is work that's been championed by Thomas Dexter in Florida. You've got everyone in America at your fingertips. Sometimes the solutions are in plain sight. Basically, if you've got Brix of 1 and 2, it might be like a golf course. It's not going to survive unless you pump a lot of nutrients and water in constantly. The system will fall over. When you get to Brix around 6 to 8, you start getting secondary metabolites. So if you get a tomato from the supermarket and it doesn't taste or smell or any aroma, it'll be below 6. You can do a juice test on produce between organic and conventional to see the difference in Brix as well. When you start getting above kind of 9 to 12, the plants are going to be able to use their water much more effectively, so they will need less inputs. When you start getting to about 12, but really 14, those plants are able to be able to produce secondary metabolites. They're objectively healthy, and the insects start to become very disinterested in those plants. So we need to do a bit more work, I think, to look specifically at what those thresholds are for grapevines, but we see this in practice. So last October, I did this talk to eco-growers in Clare Valley. One of our eco-growers at Skilly went through all their blocks and they did their Brix the following day. And you can see there that we've got Brix that goes from about 10 to 20, 21. And I just said, ooh, 19, 21, tell me more. Is there any correlation? And verbatim, this is what they said. Positively, the 19 reading is the Eco Vineyards patch where we've got the wallaby grass. So we've gone from weedy species to a perennial species and we've covered the soil. And where we've got 21, that's had plenty of soil prep sprays. So this has happened within a year on what was previously a really degraded site. So it can happen really quickly. And just to finish off, this is probably the most important diagram I've seen in the last 30 years. It's done by John Kemp from Advancing Eco Agriculture. They're an American-based company. They work with over 4 million acres, 10,000 growers and over 60 crops, and they're putting all this information into practice and they're demonstrating that it works. So at the moment, if we're looking at the photosynthetic capacity of our plants, they're probably working at 20% of their capacity. The plant health pyramid has 4 levels. The first 2 levels is around passive immunity, and it focuses on level 1 is the capacity of the plants to photosynthesize. And it also focuses on some pretty easy levers that growers can use in terms of looking at nutritional integrity of the plants. So it's not a matter of adding more, it's a matter of making sure you have sufficiency of the nutrients that we need for these processes to take place. So in order to have, within every 24-hour photo period, photosynthesis to take place to the full potential, we need magnesium, we need iron for photosynthesis. We need manganese, not for photosynthesis, but to break the water molecule. If we don't have that, there's a break on the whole process. We also need the right form of nitrogen, and we need phosphorus. So these are things that you can do. You can test the leaf sap, send it off to the lab and get a full analysis every 2 or 3 weeks in the growing season. Start when the shoots are a couple of feet long, and you can preempt any of the concerns that you might have within the grapevine as they occur. If you're doing leaf petiole testing or blade testing, you're doing that once and the issues might have already been there for 3 or 4 weeks. Level 2 is predicated on making sure that you have everything working really well at level 1. That's the foundation. So once you've got level 1 working well, you need to focus on the capacity of the plants to produce complete proteins. So if you're putting nitrogen on, not all nitrogen is uniform, as you'd be familiar. If you're putting on nitrates or ammonium, then that's going to cause big issues with insect attack. What we need to do is make sure we're not creating a real yield drag on whatever crop we're growing. And if you're putting nitrates on, that can create a whole lot of energy use within the plant to convert to amino acids, peptides, and then proteins. So there's some really good information there again. We need to have magnesium, sulfur, molybdenum, and boron to be able to convert simple forms of nitrogen through to complete complex proteins. And in doing so, we can take away the food source of a lot of the insects that we're wanting to control. So they're pretty easy things to do for growers. If you're going out every 7, 10 or 14 days, you can start to look at what that nutrient mix is that you might be able to include as foliar, not as putting them on through the fertigation. The top 2 levels are really then predicated on the plant being really super healthy, producing more photosynthates that they need. They'll send them down into the soil, but then they'll store those extra fats as lipids. And every time we put on a surfactant and we try and get rid of the waxy layer on the leaf, it's counterproductive. We want those waxy layers. That's where we start to get immunity from powdery, downy mildew, botrytis and other bunch rots. And so we need those waxy layers. And by the time we get to level 4, again, we need the microbes in the soil. We've got active immunity. The plants are producing enough secondary metabolites, jasmonic acid, salicylic acid, that they can send those signals out if they need to, if they're being chewed on. There's these amazing chemical signals to attract parasitic wasps, and they can then help with the control of, biocontrol of the insects. So that doesn't do that diagram justice in any way, shape or form. But if you're looking for a definition of sustainability, we need to think about what we want to sustain. And I think that's a pretty good place to start, is to get to level 4. By the time you get to level 4, you can also then have immunity from some of the reportedly viruses, nematodes and so forth. So there's a wealth of knowledge available. There's a website dedicated to the plant health pyramid. I'd encourage you to go and have a look. Just to finish off, I know we've run out of time. We'd invite you to join the UK Vineyards community. We'd love to share what you're doing locally with an international audience. I update regularly on a weekly basis, Instagram and also Facebook. We have more than 1,750 pages of materials which are freely available. I've written 4 best practice management guides with some co-authors focusing on soils, so chemical and physical. There's one dedicated to microbial, the biology in the soil. We have one on ground covers and also functional biodiversity. And just as a fun fact, can anyone tell me what a group of ladybirds is called? No one knows. This is my favourite bit. They're called a loveliness of ladybirds. And the ladybird, of course, is our mascot. So this is our ladybird series. We also have lots of educational materials and posters. I've got examples I can show you over the next couple of days that you can have a deep dive in. Lots of videos. We've been showcased on Australia's National Gardening Program, and we're about to start a podcast as well with me and one of the eco growers, Dan Falkenberg. So keep an eye out for that. I've got lots of editing to do, but we're hoping to push that out in the next few months. But while you're waiting for our podcast to arrive, please go onto your browser, put in the Regenerative Agriculture podcast and start doing a deep dive. That is a treasure trove of solutions and insightful information. So I'll leave you with the question, how can you apply this knowledge to break the cycle of intervention and change how you approach holistic vineyard management? I'm really looking forward to continuing our conversations over the next couple of days. I'm happy to do a deep dive and explain more any of the concepts that I've done a very quick overview of, and looking forward to talking about ways that we can collectively grow in harmony with nature. Thank you very much.